The first thing I noticed was the cars. 4 of them parked across my gravel drive like I'd somehow forgotten scheduling a reunion. Then I spotted my kayak, overturned against the dock with a crack running 6 inches up the hull, and a stranger's wet towel draped across it like a flag. Then the music hit me. Country radio punching through the screened porch I had spent 3 weekends building by hand. That was the moment the phone call from 2 hours earlier stopped being abstract and became something I needed a lawyer for. My name is Daniel Holt. I'm 44 years old, and I've spent the better part of 2 decades building things other people depend on without ever thinking about who built them. Electrical infrastructure, industrial grid upgrades, substation installations on job sites that smell like diesel and cut wire and 12-hour concrete pours. The kind of work that keeps the lights on in hospitals, schools, and office buildings where men in clean shirts use words like synergy and scalability and treat the people who keep the power running as a separate and lesser category of human being. My family had their own version of that distinction. My older brother Marcus is an estate attorney in Columbus. Polished, certain, the kind of man who treats every conversation like a deposition he has already won. My younger brother Kevin works in private equity in Charlotte. He drops words like leverage and exposure at Thanksgiving dinner, and my parents nod along like he is reciting scripture. Both of them went to school on my parents' money, full tuition, housing, bar prep, relocation expenses. My mother once mentioned, with the quiet pride of a woman listing assets, that she and my father had invested nearly $200,000 into their futures. She said invested the way people do when they want a gift to sound like wisdom. I got my journeyman electrician's license at 22, paid for with money I had saved working construction summers since I was 16. My father called it a solid trade. His tone had the gentle condescension of someone complimenting a consolation prize while already looking past it. For years, I played the role assigned to me without ever being asked whether I wanted it. I was the one who showed up on moving days with a truck and a full tank. The one who rewired Kevin's kitchen when his contractor abandoned the job 3 days before Christmas. The one who spent a long weekend driving to Marcus's house to install a fence before his in-laws visited. Not because he asked nicely, but because the family assumed I would, and assuming was enough. I worked the jobs, drove the miles, showed up when the glamorous parts were over and the labor started. I was never at the center of anything important, only the edges. The comparisons got tiresome around the time Marcus bought his second property. My parents contributed $35,000 toward the down payment. They mentioned it at dinner, casually, the way you mentioned passing the salt. Kevin got something similar when he relocated. I heard about both in the same conversation, nodded, and drove home alone to an apartment that still had a folding table where a dining set should have been. I asked once. As calmly and directly as I could, I asked my mother whether there was any thought of helping me build towards something too. She gave me the smile she used when she was about to say no while making it sound like a compliment. Daniel, you've always been so self-sufficient. You've never needed that kind of support. She meant it warmly. It landed like a door locking from the outside. I stopped expecting equity around my 40th birthday. What I started doing instead was saving. Not casually, systematically. 40% of every paycheck disappeared into an account nobody in my family knew existed, over time on every project that offered it. I drove the same truck until the odometer crossed 200,000 miles. I took lunches from a cooler I packed each morning instead of eating out. I said no to everything optional for 3 years running. My project manager, Sal, former Navy, economical with words, the kind of man who said one thing when 10 were possible and was always right, was the only person who knew what I was working toward. He figured it out before I told him. "You're buying out," he said one morning without looking up from his blueprints. "Not out," I told him. "In." He understood the difference without explanation. I found the property on a Thursday evening in late January, sitting in a job site trailer in the dark. 5 acres on the south shore of Lake Superior, Upper Peninsula of Michigan, just outside a small town called Brimley. An old fishing lodge built in the early 60s. 2 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, a screened porch facing the water, a dock that needed end-to-end replacement. The roof had a failing section on the north side. The electrical panel looks like it belonged in a museum exhibit about fire hazards. The plumbing worked the way old plumbing does when it hasn't been asked to do much. Technically, grudgingly, and only on its own terms. But the bones were right. Hand-cut timber framing, solid stone foundation, the kind of structure that doesn't ask for attention, only respect. The owner was a retired game warden named Earl, who had shared the place with his brother for 30 years. The brother had died. Earl was moving to Arizona for his health and wanted the property to go to someone who would use the dock and sit on the porch in the morning and not gut the place into a rental unit for corporate retreats. He was asking $210,000. I offered $195 in cash. He studied me through the screen long enough that I thought the deal was dead. Then he said, "When can you close?" 30 days, I told him. Done. My attorney Dale handled the title work while I was finishing a substation job in western Ohio. I signed the final documents at a diner counter in Toledo, wired the transfer that evening from my phone, and drove north the following weekend alone. I walked every inch of the property in ankle-deep snow. I stood at the end of the old dock and looked at Lake Superior. Wide, gray, absolutely indifferent to everything my family had ever thought about me. And felt something release in my chest that I hadn't realized was still coiled. Repairs started that spring. New roof, full electrical rebuild, dock replacement, porch steps, interior flooring refinished throughout. I hired local tradespeople for the jobs I couldn't do solo, and handled the rest myself on weekends between projects. I told no one in my family. Not because I had a reveal planned, because it was mine. The first thing in my adult life that had never had their fingerprints anywhere on it. I should have changed the mailing address on my property tax notices sooner. I was managing a substation installation on a job site outside Findlay, Ohio, when my phone rang at 11:40 on a Tuesday morning. My mother's number. She never called during work hours unless something had already gone wrong enough that she needed my help managing it. "Daniel," her voice had that clipped, fractured quality she only used when she was frightened and trying not to show it. "We're at the lake house. There was a situation with the dock and the boat motor and some damage, and we need you up here." I set down my coffee. "You're at my property. Kevin found the address in some paperwork when he was helping sort through your home office last fall. And we thought since you never mentioned it, you were probably saving a surprise, and then Marcus suggested a long weekend, and everyone thought it would be so lovely. I stopped processing the rest after Kevin found the address in some paperwork. Not from anything I gave him, from documents he went through on his own. Uninvited, without asking. And rather than call me, rather than say, 'Hey, we found this. What's the story?' they treated unauthorized access to my private information as permission to access my private property. I told my foreman I had a family emergency. I drove 6 hours north with my hands tight on the wheel, rehearsing nothing because there was nothing to rehearse, only documentation to collect. I turned into my driveway at dusk. 4 vehicles parked across the gravel and onto the grass. Marcus's rental car, Kevin's SUV, my mother's sedan. An unfamiliar minivan I later learned belonged to Kevin's in-laws, who I had not known were part of this gathering until I counted heads on the porch. The dock was listing at a 5-degree angle, one of the new support posts cracked at the base. My kayak had a fracture running up the port hull. 2 of the new porch steps were splintered. Not from age, from something heavy being dragged across them without padding. Through the screen I could see my coffee table shoved against the wall, and a card table that wasn't mine, set up in its place. My mother intercepted me on the path before I reached the steps. She looked guilty and relieved at the same time. The combination people wear when they want you to absorb the consequences before you finish processing the crime. "Daniel, we're so glad you're here. It was supposed to be a surprise. The motor situation got away from us, but we can sort everything out. How did you get inside?" "Marcus has a way with locks," she said, as if that answered the question rather than defining the problem. I went past her. Marcus was on my porch in one of my chairs, beer in hand, already wearing the defensive posture of a man who knows he overstepped and has decided offense is the better strategy. "Before you say anything, we thought this was the family place. Why else would you keep it secret?" "Because it's mine. Everything doesn't have to be yours, Daniel." He said the word like it was a character defect. Kevin appeared at the door. "Come on, man. It's a great spot. We're just having a good weekend. Relax." I took out my phone and started photographing. The cracked dock post, the hull damage on the kayak, the splintered steps. Kevin asked what I was doing. "Documenting," I said. He told me I was being dramatic. I kept photographing. Inside was worse. My bedroom had been used as overflow sleeping space. Juice boxes on the nightstand, a crayon mark on the wall beside the door. The kitchen had been cooked in heavily and cleaned incompletely, and the refrigerator was packed with food that wasn't mine, pushing my groceries to the back where some of it had already spoiled. The hardwood floor in the hallway had 3 parallel gouges from something heavy dragged without furniture pads. But the worst part, the part that I wouldn't know until weeks later, was something I couldn't see yet. That discovery changed everything. I went back outside. Marcus, Kevin, my mother, Kevin's in-laws, all of them gathered on the porch in that loose, defensive, half-circle people form when they know they've crossed a line, but still believe collective presence cancels individual accountability. Marcus crossed his arms. "We came up here as a family and you're treating us like criminals." I looked at him steadily. "Did any of you call me first? Did anyone say, 'Daniel, can we use your property? Daniel, can we invite people to your house?'" Silence. "Then yes," I said. "That's exactly what you are." I called the county sheriff's non-emergency line at 8:15 that evening. Not because I expected arrest that night, but because I needed official documentation dated before any version of events they might construct later. The deputy who responded, a thorough, unhurried woman named Deputy Harlan, took my statement, photographed the damage alongside me, and noted in her incident report that the occupants had gained entry without the property owner's permission and without the key provided by the owner. "How did they enter?" she asked, pen ready. I looked at Marcus. He answered himself, with the ease of a man who still believed legality and entitlement were interchangeable. "I arranged for a locksmith." Deputy Harlan wrote it down without expression. She had the practiced calm of someone who had long stopped being surprised by what property disputes revealed about families. By 10 o'clock, all 4 vehicles were gone. I stood at the end of the damaged dock in the dark and watched the lake, which had the decency to remain completely still while I made the call I'd been mentally drafting since the highway. "Sal, I need a property litigation attorney." He didn't pause. "Conrad Weiss. Does property damage and unlawful entry. He's methodical, and he doesn't lose on facts. Not cheap. Send me his number. A beat. You're really going to do this?" I looked at the listing doc, the cracked post, the damage that would cost real money and real time to repair, and thought about my mother saying we thought it would be such a lovely surprise. "Yes," I said. "Send me the number." I met Conrad Weiss that Monday in his office in Marquette, late 50s, silver hair, moved through a conversation the way experienced litigators do, slowly, with purpose, letting silence carry weight where other men use words. I laid everything out in front of him. Property ownership records, Deputy Harlan's incident report, 214 photographs and videos, contractor estimates for the dock repair, hull repair, porch steps, floor refinishing, kitchen cleanup, spoiled food replacement, new locks, and the security system I should have installed before any of this happened. Lost wages for the 2 days I'd pulled off the job site to drive up and manage the situation. Total documented damage, $39,400. Conrad reviewed every page without hurrying. When he finished, he set his pen down and looked at me over his glasses. "The locksmith is the spine of this case. They knew they didn't have a key because they knew they hadn't been given permission. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a decision." "How long?" "If they fight it, 6 to 8 months. If they settle, less." He paused. "I ask every client in your position the same question. Are you prepared for what suing family costs that doesn't show up on a billing statement?" I already knew the answer. I'd known it the moment my mother described hiring a locksmith as having a way with locks. "Yes," I told him. He nodded once. "Then let's get to work." The lawsuit landed the following Wednesday. Certified letters naming Marcus and Kevin as primary defendants, my mother as a contributing party. By Friday, my phone was logging missed calls every 2 hours. I let everyone go to voicemail and forwarded the audio files to Conrad. Marcus's message was controlled. The language of a man who spent his career writing arguments and now needed one badly. He said it was a misunderstanding, said they thought I was building toward a family retreat, said suing over property damage was an escalation nobody needed. His voice had the tight, calibrated quality of someone who knew what they said might be used against them. Kevin's was angrier. He said I was making this into something it wasn't. He said insurance would cover the damage. He said the word family 4 times in 90 seconds, as if repetition could substitute for the permission they had never asked for. My mother's was the hardest to hear. Not because it was cruel, but because it sounded so genuinely confused. She kept saying she had never seen me like this. She said she didn't understand what had gone wrong. And in a strange way, That was the most accurate thing any of them said. She genuinely didn't understand. She had never had to. I saved every voicemail. Conrad had been clear. When entitled people panic, they document themselves beautifully. And then, 4 weeks into the discovery process, Conrad called me with something I had not seen coming. "You need to sit down for this." His investigator had found an active short-term rental listing on a vacation platform. The property listed was mine. The listing had gone up 9 days before the family trip. It described my lake house as a private fishing retreat, sleep 6, screened porch, lake access. Accurate, because Marcus had walked through every room and photographed it for the listing. 3 bookings had been attempted. 1 guest had canceled when the host didn't respond to check-in questions. 2 others had paid deposits. The account was under a name I didn't recognize. A shell handle that traced back, through a registered email, to Marcus. He had been renting out my property. While his family was occupying it for free, he had been collecting deposits from strangers to stay in a building he had no legal right to enter, own, or monetize. I sat with that for a long time before I could speak. What does this do to the case? Conrad's voice had the measured satisfaction of a man who had been doing this long enough to recognize when a case changed categories. It takes it from property damage into potential fraud, unlawful entry, property damage, and now unauthorized commercial use of your asset. Their good faith misunderstanding defense just became very difficult to sustain. How difficult? Let me put it this way. If this goes to deposition, Marcus is going to have to explain why a good faith misunderstanding required creating a fake account and listing someone else's property for rental income. It went to deposition. Marcus's deposition lasted 4 hours. His attorney tried 3 different explanations for the listing. A test run, an error he forgot to cancel, a miscommunication with a friend who handled his rental properties. None of them survived the follow-up questions. By hour 3, the answers had collapsed into stonewalling, which Conrad later described as its own form of confession. Kevin admitted in his deposition that he had known about the listing. He hadn't created it, he said, but he'd known. He had said nothing. He had taken the free vacation on property he had no rights to, and tried to maintain technical innocence by staying strategically uninformed. My mother admitted they had never asked my permission before arriving. She admitted Kevin had found the address in my private paperwork without my knowledge. She said they had all simply assumed. That word, assumed, appeared 11 times in the deposition transcripts. Conrad highlighted each one. By late October, their attorney contacted him about settlement talks. The first number they offered was insultingly low. Conrad countered at full documented damages plus legal fees plus the fraudulent rental deposit amounts plus a punitive increment for the VRBO scheme. After 3 rounds of negotiation, we settled at $53,000. A signed no-contact agreement covering me and the property, and a no trespass order enforceable by immediate contempt proceedings for a period of 4 years. The wire transfer arrived on a Thursday morning while I was on a job site reviewing load calculations. I checked my phone during a break, saw the confirmation, put it back in my pocket, and finished the workday. That weekend I drove up to the lake. The dock had been rebuilt stronger than the original. I had upgraded the posts and cross-bracing at the same time. The porch steps were new cedar, properly anchored. The floors were refinished and sealed. I had put the settlement funds toward full security, cameras at every approach angle, motion lights on all 4 sides, a coated gate at the top of the drive, a deadbolt rated for commercial applications. Sal helped me run the camera wiring over a long weekend. He didn't ask many questions. He understood what it meant to work on something that was fully yours and needed to stay that way. I sat on the porch that first evening with coffee and watched the light flatten across Lake Superior. The water was dark and enormous and completely unbothered by anything that had happened on its shore. I had spent the better part of a year angry enough to stay disciplined, and now the discipline had paid out, and the anger had nowhere left to go. It felt, for the first time in a long time, like peace that belonged to me. Conrad had called before I drove up. The orders are filed. Any contact with you or approach to the property triggers contempt proceedings. They know what that means. Do they? Marcus knows exactly what it means, he said. That's why he signed without argument. Sal came up 2 weeks later with fishing gear. We caught nothing worth keeping and spent most of the day in the boat saying very little, which was the right amount. Ray came up the following month and walked the property with me in the first snow of the season, looking at what the repairs had made of the place. Better than before, he said. He was right. The damage had forced upgrades I had been putting off. The dock was stronger, the electrical panel was done to code instead of barely functional. The security was real instead of theoretical. They had tried to take it from me, and instead, they had given me the reasons and the resources to make it harder to touch. The settlement had apparently strained my parents significantly. The refinancing of their home came through mutual connections. The kind of information that travels without you asking for it. Marcus's wife left him in January, 7 months after the case settled. The marriage had been under pressure before the lawsuit, and the deposition had apparently introduced some additional stress. He was renting a place in Columbus and posting less on social media than he used to. Kevin lost a partnership opportunity at his firm. The background check had turned up the fraud finding in the settlement documents, which were public record. I heard about these things the way you hear about weather in a place you used to live. Present tense, but not your problem anymore. Then, 4 months after the settlement, I saw an unfamiliar vehicle on my camera feed coming up the drive and stopping at the gate. A woman. I watched for a moment before I recognized her. Kevin's wife, Renee. She had driven up alone. She stood at the gate for nearly a minute before pressing the intercom. "Daniel, please. I just need a few minutes." I walked down the drive and stopped 15 feet from the gate. I did not open it. She looked worn down in a way that had nothing to do with the drive. Kevin's firm let him go. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. I'm not asking for much, just enough to get through until he finds something. I looked at her. I had always liked Renee. She hadn't been part of what happened at the property, but she had benefited from the same ecosystem that produced it, the one where people assumed I existed to absorb problems and ask nothing in return. "I'm sorry for what you're dealing with," I said, "but that's not something I can fix. He's your brother. He's also the man who knew about the rental scheme and said nothing. And now you're both living inside the consequences of that decision." She started to say something else. I told her, as directly and as kindly as I could manage, that Kevin had the same tools I had: 2 hands, a work ethic, and the ability to start over if necessary. I'd started over without help. He could do the same. "You've changed," she said. I shook my head. "I was always this way. You just never needed to notice." She got back in the car. I watched the camera feed until her taillights were gone past the tree line. Then I walked back to the porch, sat down, and finished the coffee I'd started before she arrived. The lake was doing what it always did. Moving, indifferent, enormously calm. Sal texted that afternoon asking if I was free the coming weekend. He had found a section of trail behind the property that looked promising for early season fishing. I texted back a single word. Confirmed. Some things take years to build, and some people spend their whole lives assuming that what you built was really always theirs. The difference between the two is documentation, discipline, and the willingness to let the courts explain what the family never bothered to learn. What would you have done? Let me know in the comments.